imagine that most runners would wonder why some runners heel strike while a very small percentage of runners, including most professional short, medium, and long distance runners, tend to land on their forefoot or the front part of their foot when they run. In light of this leads me to talk about the potential role footwear may play in potentially dictating or greatly influencing running foot strike, because much of the research has made one thing clear, that running shoes with a raised heel, like most traditional running shoes you see in most athletic stores, tends to move the foot to land on the heel during running. However, what is problematic about this style of running is that heel strike running tends to steadily push more impact through and up the leg, whereas in a forefoot strike running style, which is commonly observed in many barefoot and pro distance runners, and by the way, barefoot running tends to bring together many mechanical adaptations and advances that results in less impact and shock waves thrusting through the foot and leg. You get less forceful exchanges between the body and the ground in forefoot running, as barefoot running tends to encourage a sustained forefoot strike landing pattern, which again may work best for helping keep impact low, whereby the low impact nature in forefoot running is what may potentially help many professional runners avoid injuries, and injury avoidance is certainly a pillar for performance advancements. What is scientifically interesting is that much of the research hints that a heel strike running style may derive from footwear, but only certain forms of footwear. And that footwear seems to be the traditional running shoe, which not only keeps the feet in somewhat of an inactive state, but because most traditional running shoes have an abundance of motion control constructs and physical reinforcements that clouds the ability of the feet to function fully on their own. But what may be even more troubling is that most traditional running shoes have a large, thickly padded, elevated heel, which may further add to the challenge of running pain and injury-free, because the foot may be tossed haphazardly in a position where high impact results, versus running barefoot. When you run in a running shoe with a large raised heel, the heel elevation of the shoe may reduce what is called plantar flexion of the foot-ankle complex during the swing phase of running. In simple terms, the raised heel of a running shoe positions the foot in such a way where the foot is more likely to strike the ground heel first more easily. This specific positional alignment of the foot in a running shoe with a raised elevated heel is the underpin of a heel strike landing pattern during running. Thus, a heel strike landing pattern during running may not be a landing preference of a runner, but rather the direct result and consequence of heel elevation of the running shoe itself. The under heel padding of the shoe may force and facilitate the foot to land heel first during running. Ultimately, in summary, in most conventional traditional running shoes, the foot sits up on an angle where the heel of the foot is off the ground. The padding under the heel may push or move the front of the foot or the forefoot and toes to point upward as the leg and foot swings out way in front of the body right before touchdown, causing you to overshoot, landing on your forefoot first, and you ultimately end up landing squarely on your heel first, or heel strike during running. So this is the real deal as to how the traditional running shoe may really encourage a runner to land with a heel-to-toe landing pattern or a heel strike landing pattern during running, causing the foot to drift away from landing on the forefoot first, which again, to re-highlight, the traditional running shoe may be preventing or may be a real roadblock from enabling a forefoot strike landing pattern, which can be a problem because most often a forefoot strike is typically what you want to aim for on the account of forefoot striking may be less burdensome on the body since impact is greatly diminished during running. And I'm certainly not the first one to make this point. If you've read Born to Run by Christopher McDougall, or if you are familiar with Dr. Daniel Lieberman's work on Kenyan barefoot runners, you will have learned that most habitually barefoot runners and most habitual shod runners, which means runners who always run in running shoes, both forms of runners have very distinct landing preferences of their feet during running, whereby many barefoot runners tend to land forefooted, whereas many shod runners tend to land rear-footed or with a heel strike landing pattern. But who really cares? Why is foot strike pattern during running relevant? Running foot strike is really something you may want to care about and be concerned with, especially if you are a heel strike runner who constantly grapples with all kinds of running related injuries. Foot strike during running is a big mechanical imperative that can have both major injury and performance implications, because the wrong foot strike pattern during running can be the biggest hurdle, potentially standing in your way of having a decreased likelihood of injury and an increased capacity to run more with more running efficiency. I strongly feel that foot strike pattern during running is the seed that may lay the foundation for impact production as well as performance outcomes. Landing heel first, even if you have lots of underheel padding, may be problematic, as a lot of evidence supports that heel strike running may have more injurious implications than forefoot strike running, on the basis that impact may be more greatly amplified in a heel strike running style than in a forefoot strike running style, even if you wear the most thickly cushioned running shoe. The high impact nature of heel strike running seems to be strong enough to penetrate through much of the shoe's cushioning. This is certainly reflected in the high injury rates among runners who run in traditional running shoes with a heel strike landing pattern. Most notably, heel strike running doesn't have a good track record for injury prevention, but the bottom line here is that new runners who haven't read Born to Run and who don't have that deep knowledge of the impact differences in forefoot running versus heel strike running, if a runner chooses to run in cushion-heeled running shoes, they may certainly expect to adopt a forceful heel strike landing pattern during running. Again, since cushion-heeled running shoes spatially sets up the foot to heel strike and positionally arranges the foot-ankle complex in such a way that makes it a little difficult to land forefoot first during running. Overall, the architectural parameters of most traditional running shoes may make it easier to heel strike when running and is less structurally adept to strategically encourage a forefoot strike landing pattern during running. In that regard, I came across a great study which is a good illustration of this. The 2014 study published in the Scandinavian Journal of Sports and Medicine, which is linked down below in the description box. The researchers found that 80% of heel strike runners who switched from running in the traditional running shoe to running in the Vibram Five Fingers, which are a completely flat, zero-drop, minimalist running shoe that to some degree mimics barefoot conditions, the runners converted their heel strike landing pattern to a forefoot strike landing pattern when these runners ran in the Vibram Five Fingers, suggesting that a foot strike transformation or a footstep configuration switch may occur when you go from running in cushion-heeled running shoes to running in flatter, non-cushion-heeled, barefoot-mimicking, minimalistic-like running shoes, whereby even the smallest heel elevation of a running shoe may be enough to offset your forefoot strike landing strategy. It may be a deterrent to enable you to effectively land on the forefoot during running, especially if you are a new runner or a runner who is transitioning from heel strike running to forefoot strike running. The research really points to the assertion that to have an observable effect and a positive influence on foot strike landing mechanics during running, that is, to ensure a more optimally precise low-impact forefoot strike landing pattern, you may really want to run in a flatter running shoe or run barefoot. That way, there is very minimal mechanical interference, particularly under the heel. And, of course, the findings from the study strongly meshes with findings from other studies on foot strike pattern mechanics, which have found that in habitually shod runners who ran barefoot for the first time, the runners tended to move away from heel striking to landing more forefooted, whereby the changes in foot strike pattern may be part of the amplification of continuous quantities of sensory feedback or tactile stimulation that surges through the feet when you run barefoot. And it's this kind of sensory input at the feet that remains one of the most important aspects that drives a barefoot runner to avoid heel striking during barefoot running and instead land on the forefoot, which essentially creates more surface area for impact absorption, which in turn helps make barefoot running feel much more comfortable than landing barefoot with a heel strike landing pattern to which the heel has very minimal padding. Ultimately, this is the role footwear, or lack thereof, plays in quickly laying the foundation of dictating foot strike pattern when you run. And we see this example play out in the study as one of the reasons the runners who ran in the Vibram Five Fingers avoided a heel strike landing pattern during running in these shoes, but rather landed with a forefoot strike landing, was that the ultra thin outsole and lack of cushioning, especially the lack of cushioning under the heel in the Vibram Five Fingers, enabled key sensory feedback to be a very valued participant during running. From this, a forefoot strike landing naturally arose as a protective adaptation in efforts to make running with less underfoot protection more comfortable, because the forefoot naturally acts as a better shock pad than the heel during running. A forefoot strike landing pattern is also a study-proven mechanical strategy to help decrease overall impact loading on the body, which may make forefoot running a very vital asset to achieving long-term injury prevention and good performance progress via reducing the likelihood of repetitive stress injury as an endurance runner. It's becoming more and more apparent that a runner can run more smoothly without strife with forefoot running. Not to mention, we are born to run, but not with our heels continuously held up off the ground as they are in most traditional running shoes. And this is the key concept that always seems to go dramatically underappreciated. Our ancestors evolved the same way without their heels elevated off the ground. Therefore, it's safe to make the case that the traditional running shoe with its padded stacked cushion heel is an inaccurate representation of how our feet evolved to interact with the earth during both running and walking. This is also why barefoot running scores very high in the injury prevention category, because evidently our ancestors ran barefoot, and from that stage of evolution preceded a body plan and a set of biomechanics that may have favored a forefoot strike landing pattern during barefoot running, which naturally keeps injurious impact levels and knee joint loads substantially lower, almost repressed, than in heel strike running in heeled traditional running shoes. I'd also like to highlight that if you look more closely at how the nervous system is behind landing behavior in barefoot running, the feet have evolved extraordinarily complex networks of sensory and pressure nerves and sensors that have very specialized functions that are intricately involved in motor memory, which collectively encompasses the ability of a barefoot runner to essentially avoid high impact landings with the foot. These sensory and pressure nerves in the bottom of the foot really serves the function of enforcing a lighter landing strategy with the foot during barefoot running. From this, it's abundantly clear that our ancestors must have utilized a forefoot strike landing pattern during barefoot running as the basic motion to avoid getting hurt, because a forefoot strike landing pattern is the striking feature of barefoot running that abolishes much of the impact variables implicated in causing most running-related injuries. Experts now view forefoot running as a very relevant strategy to potentially help prevent many forms of running-related injuries, as forefoot running really seems to have more benefits than more drawbacks. So the take-home message from all this is that it's important that if you don't want to run barefoot, at least try to run in a running shoe that helps keep the forefoot strike potential very high. If you're accustomed to heel striking during running, running in thinner, flatter, and remember, shoe flatness is very key. More barefoot feeling running shoes may help create a more receptive environment for the sensory and pressure nerves that line the bottom of the bare foot, giving you the natural tendency to want to avoid heel striking during running on the basis of heel striking becomes less alluring when you have less padding under the foot. Barefoot-like minimalist running shoes may certainly help push all the mechanical pieces together to correct and effectively help fix your heel strike running pattern and help push you and encourage you to land more towards the front part of your foot, which will help put you out of harm's way because impact forces are greatly diminished and reduced. And from this perspective, it's easy to see why I bring up barefoot running a lot, because I think it's an important call to action for many runners in helping to improve your forefoot strike efforts to where it really needs to be, since the development of a safely guided forefoot strike landing pattern during running seems to be very highly sensory driven in very large measure. And since injury rates remain very high in shod runners, the concept of less is more in terms of running shoes is going to be a very continuous narrative from an injury prevention standpoint. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you would like to see more videos regarding the evidence-based facts and reports about barefoot and minimalist running, and of course, forefoot running, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and please connect with me on social media as well to stay more informed on the hot button debate, forefoot strike running versus heel strike running. And I provided my social media links down below in the description box as well. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Have fun out there on the roads and trails. Bye for now.